Get this kid off my stage right now!
That was the first thing Professor Gordon Whitfield said when Solomon Sanders walked up to the solving station.
You think this is a joke? A 15-year-old black kid from some broke public school nobody's never heard of. You don't have the mind for this.
He grabbed Solomon's nameplate and flipped it face down. Then he leaned into the microphone and looked out at 2,000 people.
I bet $100,000 that this black kid cannot solve that problem.
Solomon said nothing. He just stood there, 15, quiet, hands at his sides. But what happened 90 seconds later left that professor speechless, and it changed everyone in that room. So what exactly did this kid do?
Man, they really counted him out. Let's see what happened.
Let's rewind. 36 hours before that moment, Solomon Sanders rode a Greyhound bus for 14 hours from Chicago to Philadelphia. He was 15 years old. He carried one backpack. Inside it, a notebook, 2 pens, a change of clothes, and a sandwich his mother made before she left for her night shift. His mother, Loretta Sanders, worked as a janitor at a hospital, 2 shifts a day, sometimes 3. His father walked out when Solomon was 6, never came back, never called. Solomon went to Lincoln High School on the south side of Chicago. No math team, no science lab, no gifted program. The textbooks were 10 years old. Half the ceiling tiles were missing. Most kids there were just trying to graduate, but Solomon was different, and nobody knew it. When he was 12, his mother started bringing home old textbooks from the hospital recycling bins, thrown away, ripped covers, pages falling out. They were college-level math books, calculus, linear algebra, differential equations. Solomon taught himself. Every night, on the floor of his tiny bedroom, he worked through those broken books, page by page. By the time he was 14, he had finished the entire university math curriculum, alone. No tutor, no internet courses, just a kid with a pencil and a stack of books nobody wanted. At school, nobody noticed. He sat in the back row, finished his basic algebra tests in 5 minutes. Then he would flip the paper over and solve optimization problems on the back. His teachers thought he was doodling. One person noticed, his math teacher, Tamara Wilson, 28 years old, underpaid, overworked, teaching 30 kids with outdated materials. One afternoon, she looked over Solomon's shoulder and saw what he was writing on the back of that test paper. She froze. She didn't fully understand what she was looking at, but she knew it wasn't algebra. She did some research. She found the National Open Mathematics Challenge, a prestigious national competition held every year in Philadelphia, open to everyone, college students, graduate students, anyone who could qualify. In 34 years, not a single high school student had ever entered. The competition was built for universities, for PhDs, for people with resources and reputations. Tamara signed Solomon up anyway. The organizers accepted his application. The rules didn't have an age limit. They just never expected they would need one. So there he was, a 15-year-old black kid from a broke public school standing inside the Philadelphia Convention Center. 2,000 seats, giant screens, cameras everywhere. The biggest math competition in the country. His badge read, Lincoln High School, Chicago, Illinois. He looked around. Every other badge said MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Caltech. The competitors wore university hoodies and carried laptops and portable whiteboards. They were 20, 22, 26 years old. Some were doctoral candidates. Solomon had a fabric backpack and a grid notebook. Now let's talk about the man who would try to destroy him. Professor Gordon Whitfield, 61 years old. Sterling professor of applied mathematics at one of the most prestigious universities on the East Coast. Over 90 published research papers. 3-time National Award winner for mathematics education. Consultant to the Department of Defense on cryptographic modeling. Whitfield wasn't some loudmouth with an opinion. He was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, and that's what made him dangerous. He arrived at the competition with 6 doctoral students following behind him like a small army. He shook hands with sponsors. He sat on the judging panel for the final round. He gave the opening keynote speech that morning. And during that speech, standing on stage in front of 2,000 people, he said this: "In my experience, depth of training matters more than raw talent. You cannot shortcut rigor. And some programs, I'll be candid, simply do not have the infrastructure to develop world-class mathematical thinking." He wasn't looking at anyone in particular when he said it. He didn't have to. Everyone understood. Solomon sat in the back row. He didn't react. Tamara, sitting next to him, whispered, "You heard what he just said, right?" Solomon nodded. "I heard." Long pause. "It's okay, Miss Wilson. I came here to solve math." Here's what made this competition different from anything else. The winner would receive a $250,000 research grant and an invitation to join an elite research program. For the college students, that was a career launch pad. For Solomon, a kid whose mother couldn't afford a computer, it was an entire universe of possibility. But before any of that could happen, Solomon had to survive the first round. And the people who built the bracket had put him exactly where they wanted him, right in front of Gordon Whitfield's best student. Day 2, morning. The bracket for the round of 64 went up on the big screen. Someone found his name at the bottom. Right next to it, Craig Burnham, 26 years old, 4th-year doctoral candidate, Whitfield's top student, seed number 3 in the entire tournament. That's how the system worked. Unranked competitors got matched against top seeds in the first round. It was designed to filter out the nobodies early, and Solomon was the only unranked entry in the whole competition. The youngest competitor in 34 years of this event. A 15-year-old kid about to go head-to-head with a 26-year-old PhD candidate. Some of the other competitors saw the matchup on the screen and actually laughed. One of them nudged his teammate and pointed at Solomon's badge. "Lincoln High School? Where is that? A middle school?" Solomon heard it. He kept walking. Minutes before the round started, Solomon was at his station, setting up, trying to stay calm. Then Professor Whitfield walked past. He stopped right between the 2 stations. He didn't look at Solomon. He spoke directly to Burnham, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Craig, just focus on your technique. Take your time. There is absolutely no reason to feel any pressure here." Then he glanced at Solomon. This 15-year-old kid sitting at a desk where his feet didn't even reach the floor because the chair was too tall. Whitfield smiled, a thin, cold smile, and he added, "Fundamentals always beat enthusiasm." A few competitors standing nearby looked away, uncomfortable. They knew exactly what Whitfield meant, but nobody said a word. Solomon's jaw tightened. He gripped the marker in his hand, but he stayed quiet. After Whitfield walked away, Solomon left his station. He went to the hallway behind the stage. He stood against the wall, not moving, not pacing, just standing there with his eyes down. This wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was doubt. 15 years of being invisible. 15 years of being told in 100 quiet ways that boys like him don't end up on stages like this, that his school doesn't produce people who matter, that his neighborhood doesn't grow minds worth noticing. All of that was pressing down on his chest right now, and for the first time since he got on that bus in Chicago, he was asking himself if maybe they were right. Maybe he should just go home. Tamara found him. She saw his face, and she understood immediately. She didn't give a speech. She didn't tell him to believe in himself. She didn't say it would be okay. She said 5 words. "So, you didn't ride 14 hours on a bus to walk out of here with your head down." That was it. Solomon looked up. He looked toward the stage. The timer was being set. The giant screen lit up with the first problem. 2,000 people were settling into their seats. He walked back to his station. He picked up the marker. He was 15 years old. He was alone. He was going up against a man nearly twice his age, who had been trained by the most powerful professor in the room. But he was done being quiet about what he could do. Now, here's the thing. What happened next in that first round wasn't just unexpected. It was the kind of moment that made 2,000 people realize they might be watching something they'd never seen before. And it started with a mistake. Not Solomon's mistake, someone else's. Round of 64. Station 1. Craig Burnham, 26 years old, 6'1", wearing a navy blazer with his university crest on the pocket. He looked like he was born for this stage. Station 2. Solomon Sanders, 15 years old, 5'4", thrift store shirt, grid notebook tucked under the desk. His feet dangled a few inches off the floor because the chair was built for adults. The problem appeared on the giant screen, projected 10 feet tall so every person in that auditorium could see it. A constrained optimization problem with nonlinear boundary conditions, 12 variables, multiple constraints, the kind of problem that most college seniors would struggle to set up in an hour. They had 12 minutes. Burnham started immediately. His marker moved fast and confident across the whiteboard. He was using the standard Lagrangian method, textbook approach, clean technique, exactly what you'd expect from a fourth-year doctoral student trained by Gordon Whitfield. Solomon didn't move. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. He just stared at the board. His marker was in his hand, but it never touched the surface. The crowd started murmuring. A few people in the front rows exchanged glances. One of the graduate students in the third row leaned over to a friend and whispered, "He's freezing up. I knew it." Whitfield, sitting at the judging table, watched Solomon with a look that was almost pity. Almost. Underneath it was satisfaction. This was exactly what he expected. A kid from a no-name school paralyzed by a real problem on a real stage. Then Solomon started writing. Not slowly, not hesitantly. He wrote with a calm, steady speed that looked almost mechanical. Line after line, clean, precise, no crossing out, no pausing. What was he doing? He had seen something. In those 15 seconds of silence, while everyone thought he was freezing, Solomon had recognized a hidden geometric structure inside the problem. The 12 variables weren't independent. They were connected by a symmetry in the constraint space. And if you transform the entire problem into a new coordinate system, those 12 variables collapsed into 4. He wasn't solving the same problem Burnham was solving. He was solving a simpler, equivalent version of that problem, a version that nobody else in the room had seen. Burnham's whiteboard was filling up with dense equations, line after line of Lagrangian multipliers, partial derivatives, substitution chains. It was correct. It was rigorous. It was slow. Solomon's whiteboard had 4 lines. He finished in 7 minutes and 40 seconds. He set the marker down and sat back. Burnham was still writing. The crowd noticed. How could they not? The giant screen showed both boards side by side. One was packed with work. The other had 4 clean lines and an answer circled at the bottom. And the kid who wrote those 4 lines was sitting with his hands in his lap, waiting. Then something happened that nobody expected. The judges began reviewing both solutions. Burnham finished with about a minute to spare. His work filled the entire board. The lead judge started checking Burnham's solution step by step on the big screen. Solomon was watching too. Not his own board. He was watching Burnham's. His eyes moved across the projected equations, line by line, calm, focused. Then they stopped, fixed on one specific spot. He raised his hand. The auditorium went quiet. A competitor raising his hand during the judging review was unusual. The lead judge looked over. "Yes?" Solomon spoke. His voice was soft, almost too soft for the room, but in the silence, every word carried. Excuse me, third constraint, second line. The inequality has to flip when you divide by the negative coefficient. His optimal point is outside the feasible region. Nothing. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the lead judge turned back to the screen. She looked at the third constraint. She followed the algebra. She checked the sign. Solomon was right. Burnham had divided both sides of an inequality by a negative number and forgot to reverse the direction. A small mistake, the kind of thing you learn in pre-calculus, but it meant his entire answer was invalid. His optimal point didn't satisfy the constraints. The solution looked correct, but it wasn't. And a 15-year-old kid had caught it from across the stage, on someone else's work, projected on a giant screen, while the entire judging panel, all of them university professors, had missed it. The lead judge looked at Solomon, then at Burnham, then back at the screen. The competitor is correct. Mr. Burnham's solution is invalid. The result stands for Mr. Sanders. The room shifted. You could feel it. 2,000 people recalculating what they were looking at. Burnham stared at his own board. Then he turned and looked at Solomon. Not angry, shocked, genuinely shocked. He had just been beaten and corrected by a kid who was 11 years younger than him. Up at the judging table, Whitfield took off his glasses and cleaned them, a small gesture, the kind you make when you need a moment to process something your brain doesn't want to accept. Solomon didn't celebrate. He didn't pump his fist. He didn't even smile. He capped his marker, sat back down, and waited. Quiet. 15 years old. The first ripple moved through the crowd. Phones came out. People whispered to each other. A few pointed at the screen where Solomon's 4-line solution still glowed next to Burnham's full board. The independent entry, the high school kid, the only minor in the competition. He had just dismantled the number 3 seed in under 8 minutes, and he had caught an error that every judge in the room had missed. But here's what mattered most. Gordon Whitfield had just seen, with his own eyes, exactly what Solomon Sanders could do. And instead of accepting it, he started planning what to do about it. Word spread fast. By the time the round of 16 started, people in the auditorium were already talking about the kid from Lincoln High School, the one who beat Whitfield's doctoral student, the one who solved a 12-variable problem in 4 lines, the one who caught a mistake the judges missed. Solomon's next opponent was a senior from a top 10 university, 23 years old, 8 years older than Solomon. He had placed in this competition 2 years in a row. The problem was a stochastic network failure model, predicting cascading breakdowns across interdependent systems. Heavy math, the kind of thing that graduate research teams spend weeks modeling. Solomon finished in 6 minutes and 20 seconds. His opponent was still writing the opening equations, not close to finishing, still setting up the framework, still defining variables. Solomon was already done, sitting back, hands in his lap, waiting again. The crowd didn't murmur this time. They went quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet, the kind where 2,000 people are realizing at the same time that what they're watching isn't a fluke. It's not luck. It's not a one-round miracle. This kid sees things other people can't see. The quarterfinals came next. Solomon's opponent was a second-year doctoral candidate from an Ivy League school, 24 years old, confident, well-prepared. Halfway through the round, the opponent made an error in a differential equations problem, a sign error in a boundary condition. The judges didn't catch it. Solomon didn't raise his hand this time. He just wrote the corrected version on his own board, quietly. He drew a small arrow pointing to the relevant step, didn't say a word, didn't look at the judges, didn't look at his opponent. The camera caught it. The judges caught it. The correction was valid. Solomon advanced. No words, no drama, just the answer. By now, Solomon Sanders was a story that had escaped the building. Social media was lighting up. Posts and clips were spreading. A 15-year-old black kid from a public school in the south side of Chicago. No institutional backing. No coach, no team, just a grid notebook and a thrift store shirt. And he was cutting through the best math students in the country like they were standing still. Every opponent was older. Every opponent had more training, more resources, more support. None of it mattered. But while the crowd was falling in love with Solomon, someone else was getting angry. Gordon Whitfield had stopped smiling after the first round. By the quarterfinals, he wasn't just unhappy, he was hostile. He was seen talking with other judges between rounds, low voices, serious faces. Then he filed a formal request with the competition chair. He wanted a rule change for the final round. Specifically, he wanted to restrict the types of solution methods that competitors could use. He didn't say Solomon's name. He didn't have to. The restriction was aimed directly at the geometric transformation technique that Solomon had been using to dominate every round. The request landed on the desk of Dr. Eleanor Whitmore, 58 years old, Dean of the College of Sciences at the host university, former Fields Medal shortlist nominee, and the chair of this competition. Whitmore read the request. She looked at Whitfield. Her response was one sentence. "The rules were published 8 months ago, Professor Whitfield. They apply equally to all participants. Your request is denied." Whitfield's face didn't change, but his eyes did. Something cold settled behind them. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. And that's the thing about men like Whitfield. When they can't win inside the rules, they start looking for ways around them. When a 15-year-old kid from nowhere starts threatening 40 years of authority, the response isn't admiration, it's destruction. Okay, real talk. This kid is 15. 15. And he's smoking every single person they throw at him. Meanwhile, the most powerful guy in the room is trying to rewrite the rules to stop a child. A whole grown man scared of a kid. That's wild to me. So here's where things stood. Solomon had made it to the final round. The last two standing. Him and whoever came out of the other bracket. But Whitfield had one more night before that final, and he was going to use every hour of it. The question was, what was he willing to do to make sure this kid lost? That night, Solomon sat alone in a budget hotel room 6 blocks from the convention center. Tamara had booked it with her own money, her teacher's salary. She never told him that. The room was small, one lamp, thin walls, traffic noise outside. Solomon sat on the edge of the bed with the hotel notepad in his lap, working through practice problems with a ballpoint pen. No laptop, no tablet, just pen and paper, the way he'd always done it. At 10:15, he called his mother. Loretta picked up on the third ring. She sounded exhausted. She had just finished her second shift. "You eating?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you solving things?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. That's all I need to hear." That was the whole conversation. 16 seconds. A hospital janitor who didn't understand optimization theory or geometric transformations or constraint matrices. But she understood her son. She understood that he needed to hear her voice. And he understood that she needed to know he was okay. 16 seconds. And it said everything about why this kid was fighting so hard. While Solomon was sitting on that hotel bed, Gordon Whitfield was having a very different kind of evening. He hosted dinner at an upscale restaurant near the venue. The guest list, competition sponsors, senior judges, 2 members of the academic review board, wine glasses, white tablecloths, the kind of dinner where decisions get made before anyone votes. Whitfield didn't mention Solomon by name. He was too smart for that. Instead, he talked about the importance of institutional credibility in mathematical research. He talked about the risk of elevating unvetted talent. He talked about how embarrassing it would be for the competition if a high school student with no formal training won the title. "What message does that send?" he said, swirling his glass. "That rigor doesn't matter? That decades of institutional excellence can be replaced by a child with a notebook?" He let the question sit. He didn't need to answer it. The seeds were planted. And somewhere between the second course and dessert, a decision was made about the final round problem set. Day 3, the final. Solomon arrived at the convention center early. The hallways were already buzzing. Camera crews were setting up. The auditorium was filling. 2,000 seats. Almost everyone taken. He walked to the competitor's staging area and found three things waiting for him. The first, the final round problem set had been changed overnight. Dr. Whitmore confirmed that the problems had been updated by the judging panel. Standard procedure, she said. But the new problems leaned heavily into abstract algebraic topology. That was Whitfield's specialty. The old problem set had favored applied optimization, Solomon's natural strength. Someone had shifted the ground underneath him while he slept. The second, his opponent. Solomon had expected to face whoever won the other bracket. Instead, the name on the board was Derek Adams, 25 years old, another one of Whitfield's doctoral students, from a completely different bracket. Adams was technically gifted, well prepared, and had been personally coached by Whitfield for exactly this scenario. The third, the bet. This was the moment, the one from the beginning of this story, the one you've been waiting to see in full. The auditorium was packed, 2,000 people, giant screens glowing, cameras rolling. The live stream was live. Solomon walked to his station. He placed both hands flat on the desk. 15 years old, alone. Professor Gordon Whitfield stood up from the judging table. He picked up the microphone. He looked at Solomon, looked him up and down. Then he turned to the crowd. "Get this kid off my stage, right now." The room went cold. "You think this is a joke? A 15-year-old black kid from some broke public school nobody's ever heard of? You don't belong here, son. You don't have the mind for this. You never did, and you never will." 2,000 people, silent, frozen, watching a 61-year-old professor say these words to a child. Then Whitfield leaned closer to the microphone. "I bet $100,000 that this black kid cannot solve that problem." He reached across the desk and grabbed Solomon's nameplate, flipped it face down, pressed it flat with his palm, like he was squashing a bug. Gone. The boy's name erased in front of everyone. Some people in the crowd gasped. A few looked away. One woman in the fourth row covered her mouth, but nobody stood up. Nobody said stop. That's how power works. When the most important man in the room decides to humiliate a child, the room lets him. Solomon stood at his station. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He didn't shout back. He just stood there. 15. Quiet. His hands flat on the desk. But behind the stage, after the cameras cut away for the pre-round setup, Tamara found him in the hallway. He was standing against the wall, palms flat on the concrete, head down. "They changed the problems," he said. His voice was steady but thin. "They put his student in my bracket, and he just said that in front of everyone. He called me that in front of everyone." Tamara didn't touch him. She didn't hug him. She just stood there, 2 feet away, and waited. "So what are you going to do?" she said. A long silence, the sound of the crowd filtering through the walls, 2,000 people settling into their seats for the final. Solomon turned around. His eyes were calm, not angry, not scared, something else. The look of a 15-year-old who had just decided, "I'm going to solve it." He walked back to the stage. The lights hit him. The screens glowed. Derek Adams was already at his station, marker in hand, ready. The timer was set. The problem would appear on the screen any second now. Whatever Solomon's strategy was, whatever he had learned in those broken textbooks on his bedroom floor, he was about to use all of it under the brightest lights of his life, in front of a man who had bet $100,000 on his failure, who had called him a black kid who didn't belong, who had erased his name from the desk. The clock was about to start, and nobody in that room, not a single person, had any idea what was coming. The problem appeared on the screen, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of one complex problem, the judging panel had created a 2-part challenge, Part A and Part B, both projected side by side on the giant screen for 2,000 people to see. Part A was a standard proof in abstract algebraic topology, difficult, technical, but solvable by any competent finalist. This was Whitfield's home turf, his specialty. His doctoral student, Derek Adams, had been trained on exactly this kind of problem for years. Part B was different. Part B was an applied optimization problem, real-world framing, multiple variables, multiple constraints. On the surface, it looked like the kind of problem Solomon had been crushing all tournament, his strength, his territory. But something was wrong with it. Part B had been built with a trap inside. Two of its constraints, the third and the fifth, contradicted each other. They couldn't both be true at the same time under the given parameters, which meant the problem, as written, had no valid solution, no feasible region, no answer, nothing. It was impossible, on purpose. This was Whitfield's final move. Part A guaranteed his student would score. Adams would solve it clean and fast because it was exactly what he'd been trained to do. Part B was designed to destroy Solomon. If he tried to solve it, he would waste precious minutes chasing an answer that didn't exist. If he said it couldn't be solved, Whitfield would frame him as a quitter, a kid who gave up, a kid who wasn't ready for this level. Either way, Solomon loses. But here's what Whitfield didn't understand. The real test hidden inside Part B, the test that only someone with deep applied instincts would recognize, wasn't about solving the problem as written. It was about seeing that the problem couldn't be solved as written, proving why, then fixing it, rewriting the flawed constraint to make the problem work, and solving the corrected version. The answer wasn't a number. The answer was the question itself. But you'd have to be extraordinary to see that. In real time, on stage, under pressure. With a clock running and 2,000 people watching, Derek Adams picked up his marker and started Part A immediately. Fast, confident, exactly as trained. Solomon stood at his station. He wasn't looking at Part A. He was staring at Part B. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. His marker hadn't moved. The crowd shifted in their seats. Not again. Was he freezing up? Up at the judging table, Gordon Whitfield leaned back in his chair, and for the first time all day, he smiled. Solomon started with Part A. His hand moved, but slower than before. The crowd could feel it. Something was off. He completed Part A in 4 minutes, clean, correct, but without the elegance that had defined every round before this one. No geometric trick, no 4-line miracle, just solid, mechanical work. His mind wasn't on Part A. It was already on Part B. He turned to the second board, picked up a fresh marker, started writing. He set up the constraint matrix, defined the variables, began the optimization. His hand moved steadily for about 45 seconds. Then it stopped. Solomon stared at the board. His marker hovered an inch from the surface. He didn't write. He didn't move. He just looked. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. He had hit it. The contradiction. Constraints 3 and 5. They pulled in opposite directions. Under the given parameters, they couldn't coexist. The feasible region collapsed into nothing, an empty set. There was no solution. And now Solomon understood exactly what had happened. This problem wasn't hard. It was rigged. Someone had deliberately placed two contradictory constraints inside it. Someone who knew that a kid with applied instincts would go straight for Part B. Someone who wanted that kid to waste his time, to struggle, to fail, in front of everyone. 20 seconds, 25, 30 seconds of silence. The camera zoomed in on Solomon's face. This is what a crisis looks like on a 15-year-old. Not screaming, not crying, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when you realize the most powerful person in the room built a machine specifically designed to break you. If he says the problem is unsolvable, Whitfield wins. He calls the kid a quitter. Not ready, not smart enough, just a boy from a broke school who got lucky for a few rounds. If he tries to force a solution, he wastes the clock and loses anyway. Either way, checkmate. The crowd murmured. Derek Adams was nearly finished with part A. His marker was moving confidently. The timer on the screen read 5 minutes and 38 seconds remaining. Solomon's part B board had 3 lines of work and a long, empty space beneath them. Then, from the judging table, a voice. Not into the microphone, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. It appears we've reached the limit. Whitfield, calm, satisfied, like a man watching a prediction come true. Solomon heard it. His marker hand dropped to his side. His shoulders dipped. Just slightly, just enough. For one terrible second, it looked like he was about to step back from the board, turn around, walk off the stage. A 15-year-old kid, alone on that stage, trapped by a man 3 times his age with 4 times his power. 2,000 adults in the seats and not one of them stepping in. Then a voice cut through the silence. Not from the judging table, not from the stage, from the 6th row. Clear, steady, not loud, but sharp enough to reach him. So, solve the real problem. 5 words. Tamara Wilson, the math teacher from Lincoln High School who made $29,000 a year, who signed him up for this competition, who paid for his hotel room with money she didn't have, who saw him before anyone else did. She didn't say believe in yourself. She didn't say you can do it. She said solve the real problem, because she knew he could see it. She knew he already understood what was really on that board. Solomon looked at part B again. His eyes changed. Not anger. Something sharper. Something deeper. The kind of focus that only comes when you have nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. He picked up the marker, and he started writing with a speed and a clarity that made every single person in that room stop breathing. What was he doing? What had he seen that no one else could see? Here's what 2,000 people watched a 15-year-old boy do in 90 seconds. Solomon didn't try to solve part B the way it was written. He didn't force an answer into a broken equation. He didn't guess. He didn't approximate. He did something that nobody in that auditorium expected. He proved the problem was impossible. Then he fixed it. Then he solved the fixed version in 90 seconds. This is how it happened, step by step. Right there on the giant screen for every person in that room to see. First 15 seconds, Solomon wrote out the full constraint matrix. Every condition, every boundary, every parameter. Then he picked up a red marker and circled 2 of them, constraint 3 and constraint 5. He drew a line connecting them, the 2 constraints that contradicted each other, the ones that made the whole problem collapse. Next 20 seconds. He wrote 3 lines beneath the circled constraints. 3 clean, tight lines. A formal proof that these 2 constraints could not coexist. That together, they produced an empty set. No feasible region. No valid solution. The problem, as written, was mathematically impossible. And he proved it in 3 lines that any mathematician in the room could verify on sight. Next 10 seconds. He drew a single line through constraint 5. Crossed it out. Then, right next to it, he wrote a new constraint, a corrected version, one that preserved the real-world meaning of the problem but eliminated the contradiction. He labeled it clearly so the judges could follow exactly what he had changed and why. Next 40 seconds. This was the part that made people forget to breathe. Solomon solved the corrected problem using the same geometric transformation technique he had used all tournament. He reduced the variables, mapped the solution space into a new coordinate system, identified the optimal point, calculated the values. Every line was clean. Every step was logical. Every transition was precise. The marker never stopped moving, not once. 40 seconds of continuous, fluid, beautiful mathematics. Last 5 seconds. He wrote the final answer, underlined it, set the marker down on the ledge, and stepped back. 90 seconds total. The room was completely silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, a different kind. The kind where 2,000 people are processing something their brains can't quite accept yet. A 15-year-old kid from a public school in Chicago had just proven that the final problem was rigged. He identified exactly where it was broken. He proved mathematically that it had no solution. Then he rewrote the broken part, solved the corrected version, and produced the most elegant answer possible. In front of the man who designed the trap, the man who called him a black kid who didn't belong, the man who bet $100,000 on his failure, in less time than it takes to heat up a cup of coffee. Then Solomon turned to face the judging panel. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the projector above the stage. 2,000 people holding their breath. Solomon spoke. His voice was soft, the voice of a 15-year-old, but his words were not the words of a child. Part B contains a contradiction in constraints 3 and 5. No feasible solution exists under the stated conditions. I have provided the proof of infeasibility and a corrected formulation with the resulting optimal solution. He paused. Then he looked directly at Professor Gordon Whitfield, the man who had grabbed his nameplate and flipped it face down 10 minutes ago, the man who had told him he didn't have the mind for this. I assumed the error was intentional, sir, as a test to see whether the competitors could identify it. The room inhaled. Do you understand what he just did? He didn't accuse Whitfield. He didn't call him a cheater. He didn't say the problem was rigged. He framed the trap as a legitimate teaching exercise, a test of mathematical awareness, which meant that Whitfield couldn't argue against it without admitting that the contradiction wasn't a test at all, that it was a trap, designed to make a 15-year-old fail. A child had just cornered a 61-year-old professor using the man's own logic in front of 2,000 witnesses. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore stood up from the judging table. She examined Solomon's work on the giant screen, every line, every step. She took her time. The whole room waited. Then she turned to the full judging panel and spoke into the microphone. The proof of infeasibility is valid. The reformulation is mathematically sound and produces the unique optimal solution. Mr. Sanders has not only solved the intended challenge, he has improved it. The crowd erupted. Not polite applause, not impressed by clapping, a roar. The kind of sound that comes from 2,000 people releasing everything they've been holding in for the last hour. 2,000 adults on their feet for a 15-year-old kid. But the story wasn't finished yet, because there was still one vote left. Dr. Whitmore asked each judge to confirm the result. One by one, they voted. Valid, 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 valid. Then it was Whitfield's turn, the last judge. The room went silent again. Everyone looked at him. 2,000 people, the cameras, the live stream, Solomon, all of them watching the most powerful man in the room face the one thing he couldn't argue with, the truth. Whitfield put his glasses back on. He looked at the screen. Solomon's work, the proof, the correction, the solution, written by the boy he had tried to erase. His hand trembled, just barely, just enough for the front row to notice, and he said 6 words. The solution is correct. The reformulation is valid. 6 words, that pause in the middle, that tiny hesitation before the word is correct, that told you everything. Those 6 words cost him 40 years of certainty, 40 years of believing he was the smartest person in every room, 40 years of looking at people like Solomon and deciding they didn't count. All of it, gone, in 6 words. Solomon didn't celebrate. He didn't shout. He didn't pump his fist. He just stood there, 15 years old, quiet, the same way he'd stood when Whitfield flipped his nameplate down. But now his name was projected 6 feet tall on the screen behind the judging table. Solomon Sanders, glowing in white light above the head of the man who tried to erase it. The man who said this black kid can't solve that problem was now sitting beneath the proof that he could. And 2,000 people were standing. But it wasn't over. The crowd was still standing when Dr. Whitmore took the microphone again. She waited for the noise to settle. Her face was calm but serious. This wasn't a celebration speech. This was something else. Before we proceed to the award ceremony, she said, the Competition Integrity Review Board has completed its findings from this event. I am required to share two outcomes. The room went quiet, a different kind of quiet. First, Professor Whitfield's overnight request to modify the final round problem set was filed unilaterally, without full panel consensus, in violation of competition governance protocols. She paused, let the words land. The insertion of contradictory constraints into Part B was not a standard update. It was a targeted modification. The review board has formally censured Professor Whitfield and recommended his removal from all future judging panels. The auditorium rippled. Gasps, whispers. 2,000 people realizing that what they had just witnessed wasn't just a kid beating the odds. It was a kid beating a system that had been rigged against him, deliberately, by the man sitting 10 feet away. Whitmore continued. Second, Mr. Sanders' solution to Part B has been independently assessed by 3 external reviewers. Their conclusion is that the work is not merely correct, it is publishable. The reformulation technique demonstrated by Mr. Sanders has potential applications in logistics and infrastructure optimization. The competition's academic sponsor has extended a direct invitation for Mr. Sanders to present his work at their annual research symposium. She let that sink in. Publishable research from a 15-year-old, a kid who learned math from thrown-away textbooks on his bedroom floor. The camera found Whitfield. He was still in his chair. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was staring at Solomon's board. And his expression wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the face of a man realizing he had tried to destroy something genuinely extraordinary and failed. Then one person started clapping. Craig Burnham, standing at the edge of the stage, 26 years old, Whitfield's own student, the man Solomon had beaten in the very first round. He clapped slowly at first, then with real conviction. He was the first person in Whitfield's circle to break ranks, and that single sound, one man choosing what was right over what was comfortable, said more than any speech ever could. Solomon Sanders was awarded the championship and the $250,000 research grant. Dr. Whitmore presented the award. The auditorium was still standing. Salam walked to the microphone. The room went quiet. 2,000 people were waiting to hear what this kid had to say. His voice shook, just a little, because he was still 15, and he still wasn't used to 2,000 people looking at him. I want to thank my mother, Loretta Sanders, who's watching from home. She taught me that the only equation that matters is the one between hard work and the truth. The truth doesn't care where you come from, doesn't care how old you are, doesn't care what anyone expects. It just is. And if you do the work, it will show up for you every time. He paused, swallowed, then said one more thing. And to anyone watching who's ever been told they don't belong, find the work that makes you undeniable, then show up and do it. He stepped back. No fist pump, no victory lap, just a small nod, because he was 15 and he still didn't know what to do when people looked at him like that. The final image, Solomon walking off the stage, championship certificate in one hand, his cracked screen phone in the other. He was calling his mother, and for the first time in this entire story, he smiled. Solomon Sanders walked into that room as a kid nobody knew. He walked out as someone nobody in that room will ever forget. Not because he was loud, not because he was angry, But because when everything was stacked against him, he did the only thing that mattered. He solved the problem.
Bro, this one hit different. Like, for real. A broke 15-year-old kid just walked into a room full of people twice his age, got disrespected to his face, and still cooked everyone. I'm not gonna lie, I got chills. That's why I had to share this.